Hello and welcome to the Adobe Think Tank, coming to you live, the New York Times New Work Summit. And with me, I have Paul Estes with Microsoft. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me in this tank.
I know, it's kind of an experience in itself amongst the rest of the activities here at the New Work Summit. So I really am happy to have you on here because we had a really interesting conversation. We just talked a little bit about the gig mindset. So can you explain, what is that? What is that? Tell us a little bit more about what it does and how to approach it and things like that.
Sure. Well, first let me tell you a little bit about the gig economy in general. I think a lot of people look at the business to consumer side of the gig economy, brands like Uber, Lyft, Instacart, TaskRabbit, and they don't understand the fundamental shift that's going on with small business, medium-sized business, and even large businesses that we'll talk about.
Right.
So when I look at the gig economy, I look at companies like TopTal is here, and Upwork, and Fiverr, and many others that are now going from traditional small businesses that they used to serve into the enterprise. And so it's important when you think of the gig economy not to only think of the groceries that get delivered or the Uber that picks you up, but also what's going on in big companies.
Yeah.
One of the things, I wrote an article that kind of blew up on LinkedIn, and it was about the moment I learned that I could go to a website and hire a freelancer to basically do anything. And there's a world full of experts out there.
Yeah.
And for me, it changed everything. It changed how I lived, it changed how I work, it changed how I approached doing my job and strategy and building things. And it was very much a mind shift in the way that I worked. And so I call it the gig mindset. And the definition is, the ability of people, the inclination for people and organizations to engage expert intelligence, to reclaim time, and also rethink what's possible. Because one of the things that a lot of us are in is a busy trap. Mm-hmm. And so you have to reclaim that time to go and find purpose and do these things that you hold dear. So.
Right, right. And the other thing that we started talking about a little bit is this concept within the enterprise and using these tools and this workforce and creating almost a startup environment within an enterprise that allows for change and agility while still maintaining that kind of corporate environment. And that's kind of an interesting approach.
Yeah, so for years and years I've worked at large companies, and it used to be at the beginning of the year you set your budget and you spent your budget, and at the end of the year you fought for more money to spend your budget. And what we're finding, at least on my teams and a lot of the teams that are adopting this way of working, is you have a pile of funds to go accomplish a mission, and you can change on a daily basis or a weekly basis how you engage the type of talent you need and to get what you need to get done. And so it is a very nimble, fluid way of working. In fact, it's much like a startup. A lot of the teams that are working with big groups of freelancers are operating like many startups. Mm-hmm. And I think somebody said it today on one of the panels. Startups are the ones that are disrupting sort of larger companies. And so it's not only startups that have to work this way, but it's large companies having to really think about how entrepreneurship, not entrepreneurship, but within the company, how these small teams can be empowered to work nimbly.
Yeah, it's interesting as we think about startups that have really disrupted how we do business and how we get work done. You've talked about Uber, great example. Slack, another great example where a startup has really grown organically and disrupted how work gets done within the enterprise. And so it's interesting for an enterprise to take that approach and still be the disruptor while being startup.
It was really surprising to me. So in December, about 2 years ago, we launched a pilot internally at Microsoft to be able to go out and engage with freelancers to do project-based work. Mm-hmm. And more we found it valuable adding that sort of talent or those sort of experts to our teams to accomplish things for customers. And as we built that, we started realizing that Microsoft technology enabled that. We had guest access in Teams, we had SharePoint, we had all sorts of flow to automate a lot of the tasks. And so we packaged that together along with our partnership with Upwork and made it available to customers. So in December, we launched the Microsoft 365 Freelance Toolkit. Yeah. And the amount of companies that have reached out it's been impressive. In fact, it surpassed what we thought, the interest that we thought we'd see when we launched it. And so there are many Fortune 500 companies that are starting pilots and saying, hey, this is interesting. It can be a part of how we think of staying agile, staying nimble. And I think to something we were talking about earlier, how do I attract talent?
Exactly. Exactly. If we think about this idea of using technology to enable collaboration,
That's right.
when we have this distributed workforce, how do we use that to the advantage to attract the workforce of the future? So one of the stats that we're talking about this week is we know that by 2025, not that far away, really.
Nope. It used to be 2020.
I know.
Until that's next
let's
year.
Move it out just a little bit. So by 2025, 20% of the workforce will comprise of Gen Z, 70% will be Gen Z and millennials. And so how do we draw and attract this new talent, especially for a corporation like Microsoft? How can they use the tools and the technology at hand to really draw and attract that talent? I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, I think it's even talent that is older than those generations are starting to expect to be able to reskill while they work and work in different ways. But Gen Z, more so than even millennials, have the desire to be entrepreneurs, start their own businesses. And so there was statistics, there was a study done of high school students, and 3/4 of the high school students wanted to start their own business. That was their default. Now imagine if you go back 20 years, everyone would say, like my father told me, son, go get a job, go to college and get a job and work at a company. And so that's a fundamental shift in expectations for people. And so when Generation Z and the millennials, which make up a large part of the workforce today, show up, they have an expectation that they'll be given the tools and the empowerment to do their job. And bureaucracy and big companies are having to learn in very structural, hard ways and how to enable that to be possible. I've seen people come in, it doesn't work for them, and they have choices now. They can go start their own company. The barriers to get into technology is not that hard. You can stand up a website or a service or launch an app. And now, with the gig economy, you can literally reach out and build your own team. So I can go and hire and engage a big team of freelancers and do a startup at the age of 20. Whereas that would have been very hard before. I would have had to go to job boards and how do I network and stuff. And so, as talent goes to the cloud, like everything else and digitally transforms, it opens up a complete brand new world, just like the digital transformation of tools and other applications going to the cloud.
That's really interesting because we can take, how can businesses take that entrepreneurial spirit and use that as a draw to create these startup type environments within a larger enterprise? And not only do they get the advantage of having this strong new talent, they also get the advantage of having that talent propel their business forward. So it's really kind of an interesting approach.
And you can fail fast. You get to experiment. And I think, we talk about the growth mindset at Microsoft a ton and in the industry of, needing to learn. Well, if everything you try to learn is super expensive and then failing is super expensive, you're not incented to learn a lot and rapidly ideate and innovate. And so the other thing we've learned is if you can go and engage freelancers that have expertise, form a quick team and do some projects, well, you fail a couple times, but one time you're going to get it right and you're reskilling while you do it. This has been really interesting, Paul. I really appreciate you coming on board and joining us here at the Adobe Think Tank. Thank you so much. And thank you guys for listening and watching. Stay tuned. You'll see more later on today from the Adobe Think Tank live from the New York Times New Work Summit.